You're listening to the ROI channel. Hello and welcome back to the ROI channel, the channel that's obsessed with the art and science of return on investment. And I'm super excited today to have a new guest on the podcast, good friend David Klefeker. He is indeed the sovereign nomad, and I'm super excited to be able to pick his brain today in terms of the offshore world. He's an OG in terms of offshore living and investing. And guys, quick bit of housekeeping. Anything that we say today on the podcast is purely general in nature. It's just two guys having a chat about life, investments, and the world. Please don't mistake any of this to be investment advice. You need to do your own due diligence and seek the services of your appropriate professionals. So, my friend David, how are you, and where are you in the world today, sir?
Hey, how's it going, Ben? I'm actually here in Istanbul, Turkey.
Istanbul, Turkey. Now, that seems to be becoming a very interesting and popular spot, which we can certainly touch on later in the interview. I thought we might start with you and give us a little bit of a brief overview into your background, what got you into this particular field, and why you love it so much. And if you have any services that you offer, obviously we're going to have that in the link in the description when the video is out for the viewing audience. So who are you and where do you come from, sir?
So basically this all kind of started 3 or 4 years ago. But to kind of take it back a little bit further, I guess you'd say I'm a serial entrepreneur. And back when I was about 17, 18, I first read the Rich Dad Poor Dad books, and then I found Jim Rogers. And so that kind of kicked it off. That was it after that. I flipped my first house with my dad when I was about 18. He forced me to dig ditches and kind of taught me the value of work. And basically, for the last 10 years after that, basically I was just kind of traveling all over the world looking for different opportunities. Fast forward to 2015. I was in Kuwait. I was living in Kuwait for about 3 years, traveling through the Middle East. I was pretty much closing shop up at that point. I was doing some consulting work over there. I wanted to go back to the States and start a real estate fund. I linked up with who is now my partner, and we started a fund in Florida. We took basically old multifamily, basically rundown C-type properties, took them to like a B+, and then we exited that after about 5 years in 2020, just when COVID hit. That was interesting. And we moved all that capital over to Hawaii. But during this time, when COVID hit, my wife actually happened to be in Palestine. And so we were not able to see each other because of the lockdowns for about a year. Yeah. And so we were like, okay, wait a second, this is nuts. And also kind of through the last 10 years of travels, I've lived in Athens, Greece. I was in India, living there for a while. Inspired by Jim Rogers, I did a motorcycle trip through the desert for a couple of weeks. And that was
amazing.
That was really cool. Yeah. And so I read the book, The Fourth Turning. I don't know if you've heard about that or not. Basically, it's in the same mindset as Ray Dalio, and where he basically talks about these kind of 100-year debt cycles. And the Fourth Turning kind of takes that and says, look, it's not just a 100-year debt cycle. There's several different types of cycles happening, and they're all kind of coming to a head now, which is not typical. Typically, they kind of all cycle independent of each other. So when COVID hit, all of that kind of came back, and I was like, okay, wait a second, we need to completely rethink our life. And never again do I want to feel beholden to a government where I'm not able to travel. I can't, that I don't know if you remember, but during the lockdown, they also had an eviction moratorium. So a lot of our properties, we had people living there for months and months and months, and we couldn't get them out. So that's kind of what kicked off this kind of more sovereign focused lifestyle, sovereign focused assets, diversification, internationalization. And so, yeah, we just got really serious about it.
That's a fabulous introduction. You touched on all the things that I want to pick your brain about today in terms of internationalization, diversification, and adventure. I think Jim Rogers is responsible for more young men traveling abroad than probably any other single human on the planet. I mean, okay, so that's an entrepreneurial start if ever I've heard one. So you're getting it done, peak real estate cycle. Then we have the lockdowns, and I think so many people can relate to that feeling of being trapped, where you're stuck in one place, one jurisdiction. You've got no control now suddenly over your circumstances. And I mean, in your case, you can't even see your wife. I mean, you're separated from each other. That's obviously really hard. And one thing that you touched on is that all these different cycles are starting to converge, and we're used to seeing different cycles play out in different parts of the world at different times. And everyone who you talk to, and I was speaking with Ladislaus, who you know very well, last week, and he was telling me that it's palpable, like people who aren't necessarily too savvy about geopolitics or macro or whatever the case may be, but people feel something big is happening and they want to be able to protect themselves from potentially a downside. And there are people that want to diversify so that they have more options should another COVID type event occur. So what are the services that you offer with regards to the sovereign nomad, and how does that help people diversify, internationalize, and give them more control over their lives?
Sure. So I would say, first of all, you want to set up a plan, right? You want to say, okay, what's important to me? Because for some people, they don't necessarily want to be traveling in multiple jurisdictions. The thought of moving their family to a place like Colombia or Argentina is the last thing they want to do. They want to keep their white picket fence and their 2.2 dogs and whatnot. So, and that's cool. So I think, first of all, just setting up a plan and saying, okay, what do we want? What's the type of lifestyle we want? And then designing your assets and your perhaps second citizenships and residencies around that. Because I think a big mistake that people make is kind of jumping on YouTube, watching a bunch of YouTube videos and getting super hyped, and then just kind of following the crowd and say, okay, I need 5 passports, I need 20 residencies, I need 15 bank accounts. And it's like, okay.
Guilty as charged right here, sir.
Yeah, me too. And that's kind of how we started. I was running around with a chicken, my head cut off, trying to diversify as much as possible, trying to get as many passports and residencies as I could. Bank accounts, didn't matter. I just wanted to rack them up. And I think, the same thing with a kind of a strategic portfolio when you're investing. The more strategic you are, the better plan you have in place, the more impactful it can be. So I think really coming down to just sitting down, with your family and coming up with a really kind of well thought out plan, and going from there. And really, there's a lot that you can actually do without leaving your kitchen table. You can open a bank account online. You can buy some physical gold and silver. I think that's a good idea. And you actually don't need a lot of that to kind of help diversify yourself. So I think it's just about coming up with a plan and knowing kind of what you want out of that diversification and the kind of sovereignty that it can give you.
Okay. And so what are some key considerations? So we've touched on bank accounts, and we talk a little bit about residency. Perhaps explain just a little bit the difference between a residency for a plan B, let's say you have a permanent residency and the difference between a tax residency, because some people, they think, oh, if I get a permanent residency in X country, that means I have to move to that country and live there forever. And I say, well, it's not necessarily like that. Talk us through briefly just a few of the different options and why it's handy to have even just a plan B in terms of residency, offshore bank, and maybe a different tax jurisdiction for some individuals interested in incorporating overseas.
Sure. So again, it kind of comes back to your specific situation. But as far as like a residency, there's a lot of residencies that you can actually get that are considered paper residencies. So you don't have to spend any time in the country. So just for instance, Portugal. Portugal has several different types of residencies or visas. And the lingo can also kind of throw you off because someone might say it's a residency, some might call it a visa, but essentially what Portugal has is called the D7, and basically you get a residency for a year, and as long as you can show that you've got a certain amount of money in the bank or you've got a certain amount of income coming in per month, basically you can take care of yourself, then you have a path after 5 years towards citizenship. And you do have to spend some time in the country. I think it's about 6 months a year for 5 years. And then the flip side of that is they have what's called a golden visa. And the golden visa basically is a bit more capital needed. It's about $500,000 for a real estate investment. But this allows you to only have to spend about 7 days a year for 5 years. Still the same thing. You've got 5 years to get to then apply for citizenship. But at least that way it gives you the freedom to not have to spend so much time in country. Something that would be a little bit different than that would be like Turkey citizenship by investment, where if you spend $400,000 on real estate, then you immediately get a passport within 3 to 6 months. Right now it's taking a bit longer, probably about a year. But you don't have to spend any time in country, and you can get a passport. You can actually even do everything online. I've got a buddy of mine who has never stepped foot in Turkey, but he's got the Turkish passport. He's got property here, and you only have to hold the property for 3 years, and then you can sell it. So there's so many different options. Yeah, there's so many different options. That's why I think really, again, it's just about kind of where you're at in life. Where your finances are, if you have the capital to spend, because there's also really big opportunity costs for things like this, right? I mean, you're putting down, $500,000 on a property. You could, if you're an investor or you have an opportunity where you could possibly flip that several times over within that 5-year period, it's a pretty high opportunity cost. So you really have to know where you're at and what your end goal is.
Yeah. So many different ways to achieve different types of visas or residencies. So very popular at the moment, a hot topic is this idea of a digital nomad visa that allows, depending on where you are, if you can earn some money online instead of having to leave a country after 90 days, which is what a tourist visa might restrict you to, right. You can stay a little bit longer and get the hang of where you might like to be. But something like a Portuguese property or residency is very handy if you want to then take it to the next level down the track and get a passport. Well, obviously that would open up more than Portugal. It would open up the whole EU to you. And so these are things that are obviously very valuable to people wanting some diversification. American investors or North American investors taking advantage of the currency arbitrage at the moment. The euro is getting pounded against the dollar. And it's an interesting time to be looking abroad. People looking at themes like this idea of East and West becoming sort of more polarized at the moment with geopolitical tensions. Turkey has always historically been a good place to kind of seek neutral ground. Real estate's been a bubble for many years in certain places. I know in Australia, I've sold most of my real estate because you're just not getting the yields. Let's go deep into this idea of real estate in Turkey. What kind of yields would someone get? Can you finance some of these purchases? Can you buy multiple properties that add up to that 400,000 level? How does that work? Maybe touch a little bit more on those details for people that might be interested.
Sure, yeah. And actually, just to take it back a bit,
Yeah.
The like going on the opportunity cost, like and I'm sure it's the same thing in Australia as it is in the US, where, I've got property in the US where we've levered up. And so the returns are way outperform something that you would get, say, in Turkey, where it's an all cash market. To answer your question, it's a mostly all cash market, whereas a place that would be a little bit more, have a little bit more ability to get a mortgage would be maybe Portugal, Georgia. So you could kind of increase your yield that way. But in Turkey, so it's basically an all cash market. So you're kind of tying up quite a bit of capital. But on the flip side of that, the market is not going to be that affected by rate changes, right? And so, just like, for instance, the properties we have in Florida, I mean, the values just in the last 6 months have been wildly affected by the rate changes. But in Turkey, it's less than a blip. And if you look back at Turkey's market over the last 20 years, there's been some kind of ebb and flows, but there's never really been any crashes. Even when they had the coup, the market just kind of stabilized. It didn't actually have a big crash. And so it's not just about diversification, but you're also kind of stabilizing and hedging your kind of real estate portfolio. At least this is how I look at it. You're stabilizing your real estate portfolio against the whims of the Fed and their kind of manipulation. And so that obviously adds a lot to it. And then at the same time, you're getting this passport, which is basically for free. I mean, the fees to get it is like $3,000. And so that's a kind of an upside for that. And in Turkey, you can actually put together 3, 4, 5 properties, however many you need to get to that 400,000. So you could buy a property in Istanbul. You could go down to Izmir and buy something there, and then you could scoot over to some place along the coast in Antalya and pick up another property, and really kind of have a well-diversified portfolio within Turkey, because those are kind of very separate markets as well. So I think Turkey has, it's got a lot of value still, and the market has gone up quite a bit, as most markets have in the last year and a half, 2 years. But I think if you're strategic about it, you can still find quite a bit of value. And I think over the long term, thinking 5, 10 years, Turkey is going to be a major player as this kind of power shift happens from the west to the east.
Yeah, I can certainly see that happening. So that's amazing. You don't have to park all your capital in one property necessarily. You can have multiple properties that add up to that critical threshold. And then in going through the process with trusted local lawyers and accountants, I presume, then at the end of it, you also have not a residency, but a whole passport and citizenship, the whole box and dice, which for context, I mean, that can take 5, 6 years in various other parts of the world, and in some parts of the world they don't allow it at all. So you're out of luck, and so it's an all cash market, which reduces some of that volatility. Not like Australia, where we're a house of cards with variable rates and everything's jacked up to the gills with debt. So all you degenerate private equity guys that were hoping to load up on high ROIs with the debt denominated in Turkish lira that would just be inflated away, maybe not so much, but at least you get the stability from an all cash market.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing. I mean, obviously, again, if you're kind of comparing, say, like the Portuguese Golden Visa to the Turkish CBI program, which is the Citizenship by Investment, you get the passport within 12 months. You have a bit more diversification, a bit of a hedge against interest rates, but you also have to think, the Turkish passport is not as strong as the Portuguese passport, right? I mean, I think we would consider that kind of a tier C passport. You've got somewhere around 110 visa-free countries that you can visit. The US and Schengen are not part of that, obviously. Whereas the Portuguese passport, I mean, they're in the top 10 in the world, incredibly strong passport. But you've got to put in the time and considerable amount of capital to do it. There is a few cheaper options in Portugal. If you go to more of like a low density area, kind of in the villages, you find a property that's more than 30 years old, needs some renovation, or maybe it's also, or it's already been renovated. So there are some kind of budget-friendly options. Another option that you could do is actually go to Chile and put, I think it's like $25,000-$30,000 in the bank, or prove that you've got a certain amount of income that adds up to that. You spend 150, 180 days the first year in the country, and then the next 4 years, I think you can just spend about 7 to 10 days there every year, and you get a passport at the end of that 5 years. And the Chilean passport, again, is a fairly strong passport. Now, set aside the current political situation in Chile. I don't know if you want to, it's like jumping out of the pan into the fire. But at least there are some budget-friendly options instead of just having to put $500,000 into a market.
So guys, there you have it. That's why he's the expert. We've just touched on potential options for different types of budgets, different types of people in the Americas, Europe, and Central Asia / Europe with Turkey. So I presume that people can get in contact with you if they need a little bit of help in terms of working their way through this spider web of offshore investing and living. What's the number one trend you're seeing at the moment? I've seen a lot about Turkey. Where are people coming to you and asking you most about as we speak now?
Yeah, I think you got to be careful to follow like I said, follow the crowds and to kind of get hyped into a specific market. We did a bunch of research and we put some boots on the ground, and that's actually one thing that I would highly suggest, if you can do it, is create a list of countries that you think you might enjoy living in, and then start to do a ton of research on those, whittle those down to say 3 or 4 kind of solid shortlist countries, and then just go and put some boots on the ground, put some time in the country, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, and to really kind of get an idea if you can live there long term. So we went to Georgia. Georgia is an absolutely beautiful country, amazing people, great food, great wine. They're actually in the top 10 countries in the world, ease of doing business. So really, really easy to do business there in Georgia. You can open a bank account fairly easily. The only issue is it might not be there might be not enough going on for you. So if you're a guy who likes Colombia, likes the action and the danger of Colombia, you're going to go to Georgia and just be bored out of your mind. But for a family, I think Georgia's a great play. It's a great addition to kind of an overall portfolio of flags. So yeah, I think just figuring out which countries that are kind of best suited for your lifestyle.
That's a great tip, and that's why it's great to have you on the show, because you can save people so much time using your experience. Why should people who are serious about protecting their assets in the future diversify more globally? So this is something that I've noticed, mainly predominantly English-speaking countries. So Australia would definitely be one, and the US, I've noticed the most change in that I started going to the US. I think the first trip was 2004. No, it must have been, 2012, something like that. And when I first went there, people couldn't even place my accent. Like people were just, I think like 1% of the nation had a passport. The US was everything, and no one really cared about anywhere outside of the US. And I've been there, I don't know how many times, but it's a lot of times. And every time I go there, people just become more and more interested in life outside the US. And I'm following people on Twitter who, there's this huge movement of people in the US that have turned full circle and are starting to look at abroad for different options. Why is it that people are doing that in terms specifically of asset protection and diversification, do you think?
Yeah, the last 2 years, I think, have really forced people to think outside the box. When you get locked down for months on end, your freedom gets restricted. Say your bank account gets frozen. Like what happened in Canada. You give, say, a soccer mom gives $20 to a protest just because she gets an email blast about it, and she's like, yeah, sure, here's $20 for the protest that's nonviolent. All of a sudden, a few weeks later, her bank account's frozen. So yeah, I think the last couple of years, the way that governments have treated their people and the way that they've behaved, so erratically. 1 minute, they're saying you have to do this, next minute they're saying you have to do that, is really forced people to kind of wake up and realize, okay, wait a second, I need to take ownership back, from the government, and saying, how do I protect myself? I need to become my own central bank. I need to become my own sovereign individual where I can dictate where I can go, not a single entity, a single government. So I think that's kind of number one. Number two, you've got the most amount of people retiring this decade, right, than we ever had before. And so as all of these people are retiring, they're realizing that, wait a second, this is all I've got, especially if they're cashing out this year. It's really hurting big time. And so what they thought was going to be this kind of grand retirement is now something that they're having to rethink and say, okay, well, how can I actually have a more budget type of retirement? And I think geo arbitrage is going to be a huge key for them to be able to save some of that retirement. There's a huge movement going down into Mexico, which is pretty interesting, where you've got these towns that are just completely US retirees. And they figured out that, wait a second, I can take my pension and go down to this little town in Mexico where it's, all retirees basically. And I've now increased my budget by 30-40%. And I've extended the amount of time that my pension or that my kind of savings is going to allow for my retirement. So I think that's a huge component of it. I'm actually helping my mom now with going through that whole process. Thankfully, I'm able to help her out, but I'm just going through that process with her. I was thinking, well, what if she's on her own, and she doesn't have anybody? This is, and she's not alone. I mean, I would say she's kind of, in the average cohort of retirees trying to figure it out. So I think that's going to be another big driver of people thinking outside the box and saying, okay, how can I fight inflation? How can I extend, the income that I have? And how can I get my freedom back? So I think you're going to see that more and more happen over the next few years.
Yeah, particularly now at the moment, you touched on inflation and geo arbitrage. And for new people new to this type of thing, geo arbitrage is where you can profit from the difference in currencies. So maybe you're a US citizen and you get your retirement pension or your retirement plan in US dollars, and that might not be going as far as it used to back in the States. And so with the cost of living rising, people moving over the border to, say, Mexico, where the currency is denominated in pesos. And obviously, what you can do, depending on the circumstances, you can increase your purchasing power simply by making the move by, as Dave mentioned, maybe 30 or 40%. And this is so timely. Imagine spare thought for a British retiree who's just about to retire and recently over the last week has seen the value of the pound the floor has just collapsed underneath the pound. Here in Australia, we've lost nearly 10 cents over the last 2 weeks just from the Aussie dollar against the greenback. And we have a commodities-backed currency. And so this is where this idea of diversifying in bank accounts to stop perhaps some tyrannical government overreach, diversifying via currencies, whereas you never have all your eggs in the one basket in case one central bank goes a little bit crazy, which it seems like every central bank is doing that at the moment. So it's super, super valuable to be able to set yourself up that way to put you back in control of your life. And that's what Dave does with his services. We've touched on the advantages of starting to think more globally. What are some of the most common mistakes you see people make when they're trying to do this themselves, and how can they prevent those mistakes?
Yeah, well, I think I'll just go back to how we started, and like I said, we just dove in head first, trying to accumulate as many residencies and bank accounts as possible. Traveling all over the world looking for these opportunities. And a lot of times we try to do these ourselves instead of hiring a lawyer or a consultant. And my wife got pretty good at it. Obviously, being from Palestine, she's used to filing stacks and stacks of papers to be able to travel anywhere. But I think it just goes back to having a plan in place, saying, okay, kind of having super hyper focused strategic plan, and saying, okay, let's go after these three things. And I would say you want to kind of put them in three different buckets. And you want to say, okay, where do I want to have my banking set up? Where do I want to have my lifestyle kind of geo arbitrage flag set up? And then where do I want to have my business set up? And on that piece, if I can just do it, a quick little sidebar, your business, I think one of the most powerful things that people can do, like starting immediately before the residencies and the CB and the citizenships and the bank accounts, is create a location independent income. Because I've noticed for us, a lot of times just being able to travel anytime we want, wherever we want to go, being able to look for opportunities abroad while continually making income independent of where you're at, I think is probably one of the most powerful things people can do to kind of take back their sovereignty. And it's really about extreme ownership. To kind of borrow, I think, who was it, Jocko Willink? I don't know if you know who that is, but he obviously he's wrote that book about extreme ownership, and that's something else that I think people really need to think about is taking over their life, taking over their finances, and really having that extreme ownership for you and your family's finances and your family's mobility. And having that location independent income is almost like the lifeblood for being able to have this type of lifestyle and having sovereignty over yourself.
That's such a great point, because we can get distracted by all the bright shiny objects, the citizenships, the holidays, and visas, the this and that, and then at the end of the day, we think, well, hang on a minute. If you're not making any money that's independently located, or that's not at least geographically defined, then it's all the rest of it's not going to do you any good. So you need to have a way to support yourself, and then diversification comes as a way of protecting some of those income streams. So super wise advice. It's ROI time, my friend. So this is the segment where I get to ask you specifically to the theme of ROI as to some of your experiences and achievements. So I would like to know, what is your highest ROI from any investment to date? Tell us a little bit about that. Delve into the numbers, if you will, and tell us how that came about.
Sure. So we'll set aside the crypto gambling, and because I think any kind of crypto 50 baggers is not it's more just a bit better odds than Vegas, essentially, I think, at this point. But I think for a proper ROI, it would be the portfolio that we exited out of in Florida. That was a $3.2 million portfolio that we bought. We built that up over 3 or 4 years. I think in 2020 is when we exited. We exited and it was at 20 million, and then obviously rolled that capital over to Hawaii. And so that was probably the biggest ROI, and the one that I'm actually obviously most proud of, because it was a lot of sweat and tears in that one.
Absolutely. So you started with multifamilies, and were you flipping those and then 1031xing them, or were you holding them for the cash flow and then improving the properties and that,
yeah, they're all value add.
Yeah, all value add.
Yeah. So they're all like C minus properties and B plus neighborhoods. We would go in, completely reposition, whether that was bad management, whether we could upgrade the units themselves. We held that for, I think, 5 years, 6 years. And then we actually added an Airbnb portfolio within the property, within the overall portfolio. So we're obviously able to increase the income, which obviously increased the value. And then we exited out of that. So yeah, that would be the one that yeah, definitely most proud of that one.
Oh, and was this held in like a syndication, or did you have a private equity small real estate fund? Was it just you and your wife? What was you don't have to
The
go into
background
all
of
the
it.
details, but what was
Sure.
the structure and how did it work?
So it was my partner and I, and so it was basically a friends and family kind of private equity,
Okay.
and we put that together. We were the main two guys involved in that. Everybody else was obviously limited partners, and it was a portfolio that consisted of about seven different multifamily. And that's kind of where our bread and butter is. Obviously, we'll flip properties kind of on the periphery, but the multifamily is kind of what we focus on.
And then are we financing that? Are we getting like 50% LVRs to increase the IRRs? Or is it all cash? How does it work?
Yeah. So when we took it over, it was all cash, and then we did a cash out refi after year two, and added to the portfolio through that cash out, and then then refinanced again in year four. Took out some capital, renovated basically the entire portfolio. I think we did like a $1.2 million renovation across the entire portfolio. And then at that point, that was kind of leading into 2020, and that's when we exited.
Fantastic. Somewhere out there, Robert Kiyosaki is smiling from ear to ear because that is great execution on that playbook. As we look out into the world today, so you're in Turkey, where do you think, I'd like to get some of Dave's picks, where would your highest convictions be with regards to country or region, asset classes, sectors, or if you have any particular stocks that you want to mention? Where do you think the value is at today from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think kind of taking a 30,000 foot view, super macro. I think energy, and that's actually kind of how I'm looking at real estate markets. So what markets are going to benefit from an energy crisis, or what markets might be hedged by having access to cheap energy. So just for instance, Turkey, they are a net importer of energy, obviously. So that will cause some issues, but they've got a pretty good relationship with Russia. So aside from what's going on with the war, and aside from the government, obviously what's going on there is absolutely horrible. But it is good to know kind of over the next 5 years who is going to ride out the energy crisis better than others. Obviously, I think we can scratch off places like Germany, Western Europe, and look at places that have quite a bit of energy, or have access to quite a bit of energy, like say Turkey, Colombia, Brazil. So I'm kind of looking at these types of places. Malaysia is interesting, certain parts of Asia, but I would say that's kind of how I'm looking at the next 5 years and positioning where I want to put capital. Also looking at perhaps Venezuela. That might be interesting if they can get their things figured out down there. I wouldn't just go rushing into Venezuela right now, but I think it's definitely on my short list.
And that's an intelligent approach of being aware of the global macro and what's going on and being flexible in that way, but being able to tie it back to your field of expertise. You're a real estate guy, and tying those two themes together. Yeah, that's so interesting. I was talking with Andy from Finding Value Finance, and he was talking about the fact that he might look to just a warmer climate where people don't have to spend so much on gas to heat their homes in the winter. And yeah, I thought, yeah, that's genius. I never really thought about it in that way. Venezuela is a hot topic at the moment. Like out of nowhere, it's just popped up from the dead like a daisy. All of a sudden, we've got the White House wanting to talk to Maduro, and yeah, that's weird.
Go figure.
This is where we're at in terms of an energy crisis.
Yeah.
But I guess it's going to be one of those asymmetric plays. Like, I mean, if you've got the werewolves to go down and buy some beachfront property, I mean. who knows where that's going to be in 10 or 20 years time. Do you have any experience with Venezuela, or is it just something that's kind of, it's on the radar and you're just having a look and seeing what's happening?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely, like I said, it's on the short list. You know, back when I was living in Kuwait, Lebanon was on my short list, because when I was, 10 years ago, Lebanon was amazing. It was booming. You know, there's all kinds of new development projects going on there. That pier and port area was absolutely amazing and gorgeous. And so I was like, okay, this place is about to take off. Unfortunately, now they're kind of in the crisis that they're in. So I think, having a short list and then kind of watching and focusing on kind of which way they go. Venezuela could go either, one of two ways. And so that's why I think, as you say, it's definitely an asymmetrical bet. You go in, you put down $30,000, $40,000 on a villa on the ocean, and it's either going to go to $500,000 in 5 years, or it'll go to 5,000 in 5 years. It just all depends. But I think if they can figure out how to leverage this relationship, this kind of extension of an olive branch that the U.S. is doing right now. Now, look, that could obviously change because it's how the U.S. is. But I think if they're able to leverage this moment and really build on it, then yeah, you could see some pretty interesting things happen down in Venezuela.
That will certainly be fascinating to keep an eye out. And are you playing stock markets anywhere around the world? Is there anywhere where you look at and you think, gee, this is high yield, good value? Or are you looking more at the real estate market because things are less financialized potentially, and you're, as you said, you're less at the mercy of a central bank, and you can kind of just ride out, you're getting that monthly cash flow, and you're happy with where it's at? Do you have much in the way
Yeah,
of
so
capital markets?
yeah, no, I leave that to you guys, to the professionals. I definitely have some energy in my portfolio. I've got some precious metals, some mining stocks for alpha, but it's all within like a 10 to 20% of my portfolio. I think it's great to have diversification and to kind of hedge and to gain some of that alpha. But I think I like to stick with what I know and let the professionals like you guys do your thing, which I've actually found a lot of helpful information just by watching your YouTube channel on energy and uranium. It's been incredible. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate the kind words, sir. So, what's the single biggest action that listeners can take that will move the needle in their lives in terms of an ROI perspective? We've talked about planning, we've talked about diversification, geo arbitrage. If I really put you under the gun and I say, if someone has to start today, what's the first thing they do? How do they get started? That initial step, what's it going to be?
I would say just create a plan. You can, there's basically, three things that you can do literally right now from your kitchen table, right? You can buy some precious metals in an offshore vault, like say a Cayman Islands, Panama, Singapore, and it doesn't have to necessarily be that much. You actually really don't need that much physical to kind of add to buoy your portfolio. And then the second thing is you can open up a bank account online, whether that's in Belize or in Georgia. You might have some issues as an American, but putting boots on the ground and actually walking in to a physical location is going to be a lot easier if you're an American, but it's not impossible. So those are two things that I think you can do. And then the third is just start researching, book a call with a consultant or with a lawyer, start creating that, as I said, that short list of various places that you think you might be open to living in or spending time in, and going from there.
So there you are, guys. No more excuses. There are three things you can do right now to start the journey of literally, in a matter of minutes, becoming your own sovereign individual. In terms of your services, my friend, you've just started a newsletter. Tell us a little bit about that. Obviously, we'll have the link in the description. What content are you putting out and who's it aimed at?
Yeah, basically, it's just all of my notes and experience summarized in a weekly newsletter. Basically, what I'm seeing on the ground, what's shifting, where the real estate markets are going, which ones might be overvalued, which ones might be undervalued. Talking about kind of where where I think Istanbul is going versus say in Lisbon. Just kind of sharing what our findings are over the course of our kind of journey.
Okay, and is that on Substack, or how do people get access to that?
Yeah, I'll send you a link. Basically, it's on our website, Sovereign Nomad.
Perfect. So we get access to all your years of experience and your weekly notes. And so, guys, just sign up. I'm going to put the link in the description. Also, David's Twitter, which is a wealth of knowledge. Is there anything I've missed? Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, or is there anything you want to leave the viewers with before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think it's just start. Yeah, I think the last few years, I think it's been a massive eye opener and a huge opportunity to show you, what could possibly happen and what governments are capable of. And I think the last thing you want to do is say, okay, that's happened. Now I just want to go back to normal. And I think that's the worst thing you can do. I think really use the last 2 years as a way to build, a strategy for the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Very wise words indeed. So David Klefeker from Sovereign Nomad, guys, links will be in the description. You can sign up for a newsletter to get access to his thoughts real time and what's happening on the ground, and follow him on Twitter. It puts out some great content. Man, I'm going to have to get you back in a couple of months and see what's changed in the world of macro and geopolitics. I think it's going to be super, super interesting. And I think it's like the golden age of adventure capitalists like us.
It is. Jim Rogers would be proud.
He would indeed. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I can't wait to catch up with you in a couple of months and see where things are at. Thank you for listening, guys. Like and subscribe to the channel. Wish you all the very best and take care. We'll see you in the next episode of the ROI podcast. Bye for now.
So sorry, can I just pause for 1 second?